Hey everyone, welcome back to the Senstennial podcast. I hope you missed us, and we're ready to bring you some fresh new Sens content. We've had four nations, we've had injuries, we've had a new losing skid, all that and more. The trade deadline's coming up. Bennett's returning from injury. I mean, still on IR, but he's getting there. And we're gonna have ourselves a nice little podcast today. So first off, we want to kick things off with a little Four Nations discussion. And I'll throw this one over to Bennett to get us started here. And what were your thoughts on Four Nations as a tournament to replace the All Star game, and maybe some of your takeaways, whether it be from a tournament wide angle or just about the Sens themselves who participated in the tournament?
Yeah, certainly the tournament has been a major success for the NHL. I think that's been broadly covered at this point. Viewership numbers in both Canada and the United States were extremely high, particularly for the final on this past Thursday. Um, Obviously, it was a big success for Team Canada. They were for for once Canada was not the favorite coming into this tournament. I think there were genuine question marks about the team's goaltending and about perhaps some of the depth on defense as compared to the United States, which was a team that didn't have any obvious weaknesses anywhere in the lineup. And we saw that in the US beating Canada during the round robin. But Canada got it done. In Bennington really showed up in the final, which is great to see. And from a Senators angle, you kind of got the best of both worlds. You know, you had the two Sens players participating in the final, to Chuck and Sanderson both finding the back of the net for Team USA, really raising their profiles around the league. But Team Canada dug it out and got the win. So I think as a Senators fan, it's hard to ask for much more than that. And I certainly hope that this is something that the NHL explores doing again. I think perhaps every year it might get a little bit overdone, but I think maybe every couple of years or maybe every 4 years, and some kind of like some spacing it out somehow, maybe like in the gap years between Winter Olympics, if that's something that the NHL is committed to participating in regularly going forward, then maybe every second year at the halfway mark between Winter Olympics have a Four Nations. I think that could be a fun way of doing it. But anyway, it was a big success for the league, for Team Canada, at a time when I think a lot of people probably felt that Canada needed to win. I know I certainly did, as I was in the emergency room for 14 consecutive hours the other night, um, and watching highlights of that McDavid goal over and over again helped keep me a little bit sane during that time. So yeah, I think as Sens fans, there's not a whole lot else we could have hoped for.
No, for sure. And like you said, exposure for the NHL was huge. Apparently, it was the second most watched game for the NHL behind only game seven of last year's Stanley Cup final.
And
So,
I'll add just on top of that that I was watching some of the Jays spring training game against Boston the other day, and like the baseball commentators were talking about the tournament and how big of a success it was, and how big of and exciting of a game it was and everything. I mean, like we're talking, this got generated some serious reach within the sporting world. Certainly, you have people from other sports talking about how big of a hit it was and how successful and good the product was. I mean, that's you can't ask for much more than that.
and to have, excuse me, to have the final game end with an overtime winner too, especially obviously being Canada's favor is huge. But it also just, I think, was icing on the cake as a way for that tournament to end. And I'm sure NHL execs were like, taking that thing to the bank with all the money they were making for that. So, but definitely agree with you on the Sens front. You know, seeing them get some action. Matt and Paolo getting a late call to represent Finland, that was really cool. I'm happy for him, and we'll get to him a little bit more later in the episode. But Matt, what were your thoughts on Four Nations?
Yeah, first, Bennett, I just wanted to make to your point. It sounds like they're going to be doing Olympics, World Cup of Hockey, Olympics, World Cup of Hockey for the next little bit here. So that's
Mhm.
extremely exciting.
Yeah.
but you're absolutely right. It was getting traction just about everywhere, and it really blew up the conversation between the NHL versus the NBA for some reason. And I think that had a lot to do with, I mean, recently in the NBA, you've been having a lot of load management happening. Guys like Joel Embiid, Kevin Durant, players of that caliber sitting out games, and a lot of question marks as to why, because they're the highest paid athletes, or some of the highest paid athletes in the world. So I think that was interesting. I don't really think the sports are comparable at all. But that's just my opinion. Um, but one of the other things I really thought was cool is that this totally just made an all-star break like irrelevant.
Oh God, yeah.
I went into this tournament kind of like, we'll see how it goes. And after that first game against Sweden, I was very much invested. Um, and on the topic of Sweden, I'm a bit surprised Allmark didn't wasn't the surefire starter. I know Gustafsson has had a good season. Um, but I was just a bit surprised. And then of course, in game two, must win against Finland, and Gustafsson lets in a couple, and then he finishes the game probably on the toilet because there was that going around. And then Allmark didn't even get a start because that sickness hit him as well. Uh, Great showing from Brady and Sanderson. McAvoy gets hurt, and Sanderson gets to step up and be the like overall presence I saw. And I was perusing hockey Reddit, and some people were, one of the questions was, what was your biggest surprise player? And I saw a lot of Jake Sandersons. People were saying uh, they were surprised at how good he was, and you barely hear about him. And that some people, obviously right side versus left side, but people were much preferring Sanderson over Adam Fox. And that's a Norris winning defenseman. So the American defensive core was really impressive. But it was nice to see Canada pull it out because, my God, especially earlier that day when you have everything happening at the White House and so on and so forth. So, yeah, it was nice to get a win.
Could have gotten Doge to analyze the efficiency of that U.S.
God.
overtime. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Anyway, big win for Canada. It was nice to see, like you said, it was nice to see Brady Tkachuk really highlight the American team. That's a team that had a lot of talent at forward. For Brady Tkachuk to establish himself as not just a leader for them, but also just one of their better offensive producers during the tournament, as short as it was, I think that was really nice to see. And I don't know, it got me excited because then you see all these people who don't even normally watch hockey start commenting on how Brady Kachuk's wasting away in Ottawa and they need to trade him to an American team. And it just made me laugh because I'm like, man, one like short tournament of like 4 games, and all of a sudden, like every American hockey fan is like, who is Brady Kachuk? Or if they already were familiar with hockey, it's like, can this Brady Kachuk guy come to our team? Are the Sens going to trade him? He wants out. Like, it was just really funny. And of course, it ignited a bunch of discussion on different social media platforms. But I don't know. I had a good laugh about it. I thought it was pretty funny. Um, and unfortunately, he did miss a game that was important for the Ottawa Senators. A lot of fans upset that he wasn't able to dress against Montreal Canadiens, and a game in which the Sens lost 5-2 at home to the Canadiens. And it wasn't just a 4-game losing streak after that game, it was a 4-game losing streak all to divisional opponents. So that made it even more tough because these are all teams you're competing with. Maybe Montreal less so than Florida and Tampa, but all important games. And, they come away with 0 out of 8 points. So their next opponent is not going to be an easy one. Winnipeg, obviously, one of the best teams in the league, one of the best goaltenders in the league. They're not to be taken lightly. So, that is coming up. But in good news, Kachuk, Norris, and Pinto are all expected to return from injury and play against Winnipeg. And my hope is that Olmark just had a bad game against Montreal and he can rebound as well. So that was a lot. But Matt, I'll throw it back to you first. Thoughts on the 4-game losing streak, but Sens getting some reinforcements before their meeting with Winnipeg.
Well, it's desperate at this point. Losing those 4 games, and obviously 2 of the opponents were very good, and then you play the Habs, who have been on a pretty dismal stretch there, and I felt Olmark had a really bad game. I don't think many people had good games. I thought Stützle had a great game, just to clarify for our little German fella. But the missing Kachuk, Norris, and Pinto is just, it's brutal. And of course, it all kind of happens at the exact same time. This team needs that depth to win hockey games. And when they don't have those guys, they just lose hockey games seemingly. So it'll be very nice to have them back because Winnipeg's a very good team. We haven't won against them in a little bit here. So being able to get a win on the board would be massive for their confidence and just one step closer to that ever elusive P word.
Benet, how are you feeling after a 4-game losing streak, but knowing that some of Ottawa's better players are on their way back?
It's hard to say at this point. The Senators have been rather streaky this year. We hit losing skids and then we hit winning streaks and losing skids and winning streaks. And, we're going to need to string some wins together down the stretch here to have a chance of staying in the playoff race. And it's looking increasingly like that's not going to happen. Olmark has been quite shaky since returning from injury, both for Team Sweden and for the Senators. We sent Maryline back down to Belleville, which I think was probably the right call, but Forsberg hasn't been setting the world on fire. A lot of our forwards were experiencing some pretty significant scoring slumps before going on the injured list. So, I mean, we're hoping to see guys like Pinto and Norris come back and make an impact, and we need them to have any chance of staying in this. But it's really, it's been rough at times in the last month or so in Sens land. The Four Nations came at a good time to give the team a bit of a reset, and then we came in and immediately fell flat on our face against the Habs, putting up one of our worst performances of the year. I'm certainly losing faith insofar as I had any to begin with. I think that we're seeing now how big of an ask it was for the team to get from where it was last year to a playoff spot. I think so many things had to go right. And, I think we're seeing now how difficult it is for that to happen. I mean, you can't have Norris and Pinto miss any more games. You can't have Batherson's poor form carry on much longer. You need Chuck to come back and start scoring goals and assisting points like regularly, like every game. He's fallen a fair bit behind a point per game pace. It's just been Stützle. He's like the only guy who's doing anything offensively for the team. And if that continues, the team will not make it to the playoffs. Like guaranteed will not. And we had some excellent goaltending there for a while that was saving us. And we're not getting that now. So if the forwards don't step up, we will fall out of the playoff space and we will not get back into it. So these are some really critical games coming up. There are some winnable ones in there against the likes of San Jose and Detroit and some of those teams. But like you said, we're facing a very strong Winnipeg team on Wednesday. That is a game that you would expect the Senators to have a hard time in. And if they do, it's another one in the L column at a time when the Sens can really not afford any more of those.
And hopefully it's not severe, but apparently Marilinen left the game against Belleville tonight after going into the net awkwardly. So
Hmm.
if you have any struggles with goaltending down the stretch, you're not, hopefully it's just minor. He just got banged up. But if that's anything longer term, then that's also really gonna potentially put a wrench in any backup goalie situations if you need to pull an ace, from your sleeve.
I also don't want to quibble on it, but the 2 games he played, Allmark, when he came back, he had a 919 and a 915. So he wasn't the reason that they lost, especially the game against Florida with 47 shots. And I think Forsberg's been fine.
Yeah,
I wouldn't.
he's like inconsistent.
Oh,
You don't
absolutely.
know what
That's
you're getting from
that's
one game to the
yeah.
next. Yeah.
And then obviously Marilinen was a saving grace there, but I think like your point about Batherson's absolutely spot on. Like you never know what Batherson you're gonna get, because when he's on his game, he is genuinely one of the most impressive players I've seen play hockey. Just hits people, skates like the wind, uh, deeks in a phone booth, and scores like highlight reel goals. And then some of his worst games are like what we saw the other day, and like multiple giveaways leading to goals. So we absolutely need to see this team be better, and I think they could improve some depth spots as well. And we will absolutely touch on that soon. But like, it just feels like thrusting Zach Ostapchuk into the spot he's just not ready for. Like, there's no doubt in my mind he's an NHLer, but it's just not where he should be in the lineup. And obviously, that's the fault of injuries and so on. But you need more from like Michael Amadio and David Perron. But we've been singing this for months now, right?
Yeah. Now I will
Um,
say against the Habs, the three players that stood out for me in, from 1 to 3 for the Sens, one by far and away was obviously Tim Stützle. He had a great game against the Habs. Sanderson, I think, had a good game overall. There were a couple gaffes, but I mean, for how bad the team was playing overall, I thought he had a good game.
mm,
Perron was actually in my mind, the third best Sens player against the Habs, just from watching him on the ice. I felt like he had a good game. His presence was out there. I noticed him on the ice. Had a couple of good chances that he couldn't bury, sadly, because Montembeault just came up with a couple of nice pad saves. But that doesn't, obviously he needs to register points, but at least it's nice to see that he's not just floating out there and not a complete shell of his former self. I think at least some points will come down the stretch here. But absolutely, we need more scoring from our depth, and that hopefully will come somewhat from Perron. But I just wanted to add that little comment in there. But on that note, we talked about player additions, subtractions, whether through injury or whatnot. The trade deadline is coming up, and that's a week from Friday. So coming up quickly. And from Gary Ock's latest, it looks like he had a few notes on the Sens. One of them was that a couple of league executives had told him that Jacob Bernard Docker is on the trade block. The Sens are listening to offers on him and are looking for a prospect in exchange for him. And that Nashville is one of the teams who have shown interest in JBD. This comes on the back of Matt and Paolo having a good showing at the Four Nations and just kind of being a steady defenseman for the Sens on that right side. And that has decreased Steos's need to go out and get a depth right hand defenseman. And with Hamnick, with his no move clause being the de facto 6 or 7 defenseman right now, That leaves JBD on the outside looking in. So with that in mind, Bennett, I'll get your thoughts on what you think of, JBD on the trade block and uh no more. Well, I mean, Steos could still potentially add depth defenseman, but putting the brakes on that for now because of the emergence of Matt Palo.
Yeah, I think certainly the emergence of Matt and Paolo has been a boon for the team. There's it's hard to have a thing as too many right hand shot defensemen. I mean, certainly if they're all signed to big contracts, that's a problem. But I mean, guys that are, can move up or down depending and fill in when the team needs someone to eat some minutes. Certainly not a problem. I think in a relatively small sample size this year, he looked a little bit steadier than JBD has. JBD, I think at this point has had his fair share of opportunities, and he hasn't really shown much of an ability to move the needle too much. So I don't think moving on from him is likely to blow up in the team's face. Um, so I don't see an issue with trying to get something for him and maybe seeing what Matt and Paolo can do in his place. I think Steos is going to be, as we all know, relatively limited in any moves that he can make this particular season. There's just not a lot of wiggle room to bring in anything significant to make the team better. Um, we're hoping that that cap situation can be eased a little bit in seasons to come as guys come off the books and as the cap goes up. Uh, so we hope to see the team continue to spend to the cap and give themselves a chance. But for right now, I don't think there's any help that's coming. I mean, you said the best that we can get for GBD is probably a prospect and probably not a great one at that. So, I mean, this will just be, just a
The
roster
opening
move.
up
Just
of some contract space. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. I really don't see this having much of an impact one way or another, to be perfectly honest. And yeah, I mean, if there's going to be an answer, it's going to have to come from the group of players that the team currently has. And that means guys getting it together offensively and keeping a tight lid defensively, which the team has shown an ability to do for perhaps the first time in a long time this year. And if we can get both of those things happening at once, we have a chance to sneak in there. But if we don't, then that's another year.
Matt, what are your thoughts on the defensive situation?
well, I think Matt and Paolo's been very good as a third liner. And JBD just hasn't really stuck in the lineup. He did have some very good chemistry with Tyler Clevin, which is a good sign. The issue there is Travis Green likes height, and Travis Green likes Travis Hamonic, and so um, if you can replace one of those things, I think he'd be more willing to not play Hamonic as much. But JBD doesn't have both. So I'm not surprised that they're trying to move on from him again. They were trying to do that last season as well, and it's not a fit. But his contract is up at the end of this season, anyways. So you're probably getting a bare bones, maybe a low pick or a mediocre prospect at best, maybe somebody who's struggled as well. But yeah, it's kind of a nothing burger news as we know.
Yeah, I in agreement. I think if they were to get a prospect for JBD, it'd be a similar guy who's in his like early 20s, has probably, maybe cracked the NHL roster a couple times, but is a fringe player, has some upside similar to JBD. But I think they'll probably have more interest in getting a forward back, especially because you know, if Garriock is onto something here, then the Sens are apparently more interested in bringing in a center than a winger if they're to add at the deadline. Although he also mentions in his article that one of the forwards that the Sens have been eyeing is Brandon Tanev, who is with the Seattle Kraken. He's making $3.5 million this year. He's a pending free agent, and in 57 games played, he has 9 goals and 8 assists for 17 points. He plays left wing, so I guess if they have interest in him, it's to improve their forward depth. Apparently, he's a guy they were interested in last summer, but just no deal came to fruition. And a guy that I guess they think can bring some veteran leadership to the locker room, maybe provide a bit of depth scoring. He's never really been a huge scorer. His peak was in the 22-23 season where he had 35 points, and the Kraken were quite good that year. So um, we'll see. The other name that Bruce Garrett brought up was Chicago forward Ryan Donato. I've seen a lot of Sens fans in the past mention Donato, and it's probably because he's only making 2 mil this year. He's also a pending free agent. He plays center and he has 19 goals and 19 assists for 38 points in 55 games. So he's a forward option if the Sens want to improve their middle six, get some scoring in there. I could definitely see them pursuing him. But I imagine that because he's having the best point scoring year of his career, that Chicago's going to want a little bit more for him, especially because he's making a low cap that most of your playoff teams are able to absorb versus one of the higher end guys. So, um, after all of that said, Benet, do you have any thoughts on maybe an addition like one of these two guys at the trade deadline?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly don't see any value in adding someone like Tanev. I mean, we checked off the veteran leadership box, insofar as that's a thing that anyone should care about. When we acquired Perron and Amadio, and they both suck ass. So I don't really see a lot of value in that strategy. You know, Giroux is veteran leadership. Veteran leadership should also be good. I don't think that's a hot take. The other dude, that's a guy that plays hockey. Those stats sound better than Tanev. The Sens will not get him. Next question.
Yeah, fair enough. There's always a few guys that I think their names are floated at the deadline as the Sens being interested in. But if there's one thing that Steos has shown us, is that he's incredibly patient and really doesn't do a whole lot on the trade front. So we'll have to see if he does anything there. But Matt, what are your thoughts on those two players?
Yeah, I think Tanev's biggest boon is his defensive play. And I don't think that's much to write home about at the moment, anyways. Donato would obviously be a significant upgrade at forward on a lot of our guys because, quite frankly, like we're not getting a lot of scoring. Um, the caveat being that a guy having a career year is going to probably garner quite a bit of attention from around the league, especially at a low cap hit like that. And that's the type of guy that you see going for like a first at the trade deadline. And that's absolutely not something the Sens should be doing. Um, I think you got to find something that just improves depth. Um, and even taking on $2 million of salary, you have to find a way to get that out. And that probably looks like moving out Forsberg, but that doesn't really do anything for Chicago. So you're in a bit of a pickle here. So you probably should look at another team that's having some goaltending issues and maybe look for a three-way trade or something like that. But those are very rare anyways. So
Although
I don't.
Chicago's already made one this year.
Yep. And it was, for a guy that probably would have improved the Senators scoring a little bit in Taylor Hall, but his contract was just too big.
Oh, I,
Um,
yeah. I guess I was like Nico Rantanen just a little bit, and then I forgot Taylor
yeah,
Hall was also part
yeah,
of that deal. So yeah.
yeah. But I think teams that have had goaltending issues and are probably looking for goalies, I think Edmonton kind of pops up there. They like Stuart Skinner has been putting on a masterclass of how not to be the best Canadian goalie. And thank God he wasn't at the Four Nations because I have very little faith in that guy. With that said, I think Edmonton could be interested in Anton Forsberg, but it need to be a money out situation. And then, for what they have, like, I mean, Jeff Skinner hasn't exactly worked with Connor McDavid. And I feel like it'd be hard to not work with Connor McDavid, but I don't know like I'm not an expert on who works with Connor McDavid, but I would expect if you're moving out a contract like Forsberg's, that's the type of contract that's coming back.
Yeah, totally fair. I mean, I kind of agree with Bennett. I really don't think that either guy will end up on the Sens as much as I would like to see Ryan Donato, play with the Sens. But if to me, it's like, how do the next handful of games look prior to the trade deadline? Do they look like a team that is starting to fade out of the playoff window, the bubble? Like that would be upsetting, but um hey, if you're Steve Stamkos, you got to make sure that what you're doing is in the best interests of the club going forward. And if you're starting to, widen the gap in a bad way come the trade deadline, then I don't think it makes sense to add. And if they were to add, I think it'll be, a bottom part of the roster type guy, maybe give you some depth defensively, maybe chip in offensively here and there. But at the end of the day, like, I don't really think there's going to be a ton of movement. I think they're going to mostly try to improve Belleville so that Belleville can go on a bit of a run. And then we might see a guy like Halliday down the stretch if the Sens need some offensive boost from within. But I don't know that. Yeah, it's one of those tweener years for the Sens where you want, like, there was a point in time, like I would say at the beginning of February when they beat the Wild 6-0. Like that came across as a point in time where the Sens were like, okay, they're gonna do it. And then we had the 4-game lose streak, and then it's
Yeah.
like, so it's like you don't want to add and make the mistake of adding, and then you just spent an asset and your team ends up not even making the playoffs, and then that player just walks. So I don't know. It's tough. I'm gonna try to be optimistic and positive and hope that the Sens make it into a wild card spot. But I don't think I'd be upset if Stamkos didn't really do anything at the deadline, because it's, again, just, you don't want to make a move just to make a move. It has to make sense for the team. If they decide to acquire a player who has term through next season and they can get for a good deal, like whether it's, a hockey trade, as they say, or something of that nature, then cool. But I think it might be a bit too early for name hunting with any of the free agents that we mentioned tonight, or maybe some of the other ones that have been brought up elsewhere. So
Yeah. And we haven't even talked about, I mean, the flip side of it. I mean, like, if we lose another 4 games, like, what's the market on Claude Giroux, right? I mean, like, is he going to want to stick around this team if we're just consistently not a playoff team? Uh, can you recoup like a first rounder for him, like for the one that we lost because of Dorian's shenanigans? I mean, if that's an option that's available to Stairs, I mean, I don't. Is that something that you could take? I'm honestly not sure. I don't even know if that's something I would want to happen, but I mean, I think we all prefer to see G stick around the team until he retires at this point, but it depends on how badly he wants a cup, right? I mean, some people, they just want to run down those years and play for their hometown team and a la Jason Spezza maybe, but other guys, like, they want to be cup chasing. They want to go to a contender every year, right? And if management gets the vibe that that's Giroux, then they kind of if we lose another few games here, they kind of have to listen to offers on him.
yeah, to me, Giroux strikes me as the kind of guy who would stick around despite not winning a cup, for the sole reason that he signed with the Sens 3 years ago. I know he anticipated they would probably make the playoffs in years 2 and definitely year 3 of his deal. But to me, if he had wanted to go to a playoff contender, he would have signed for cheap elsewhere a few years ago. Although maybe this summer he decides to do that because his asking price will probably be lower than 6.5 mil on a
Yeah.
new contract, and maybe he can squeeze in with a contender with the cap going up a bit. But I mean, we'll get there when we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. And hopefully that's not the case. And we're not talking about the Sens selling at yet another trade deadline. It would be nice for them to be in a position where adding makes the most sense. So I think we can all hope for that, because random side note, my mom sent me a picture the other day of like a couple of my buddies in Sens jerseys. And I'm just like, oh man, when was that? And then I sent it to those buddies, and one replied, "Hey, wasn't that from Boston Pizza back in like 2017 during like game 7 of round 3?" I was like, "Oh no." And somehow my mom just like dug up this photo from like, I don't know,
Of
Facebook.
like the worst day of your life.
Yeah, I was like, "Oh my God, it was that day." And I was just trauma relived. Memory didn't need to be unlocked again, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
anyway, so hopefully no heartbreak, hopefully optimism and positivity from here on out. But that's it. That's all, I guess, for this week's episode. For those of you who are listening or watching, thank you so much. You can follow us on all the platforms. We're on X, Blue Sky, Instagram, and Reddit. Find us on all of those. The links to all those will be in the description. And thanks for tuning in. And we'll catch you probably around the trade deadline.
Yeah.
Go Sens, go.
Go Sens, go.